Cast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our webinar this lunchtime on mergers for academies. My name's Alex Peel, and I'm a partner and head of audit assurance at James Cooper Creston. And today I'm joined by my colleague Darren O'Connor, who's also a partner at the firm and head of our Academies team. Today we're going to be looking at a number of issues surrounding academy mergers or multi-academy trust mergers, and we'll start off by looking at the advantages of joining a MAT or looking at two MATs merging, and then move on to some of the key considerations that schools need to think about when joining or merging. We're going to have a brief look at some of the accounting considerations. Don't worry, I'm not going to go into too much detail of that today. And then also look at due diligence and some of the things that schools do need to think about when they are looking at mergers. There will be time for questions at the end, and on your screen you should have a box which will enable you to type a question, and do that at any stage of the webinar, and then when we get to the end of it, we'll be able to look through those and hopefully answer as many as we still have time for. In total, we expect the session today to last about half an hour. Before we start, it's really useful for us just to get an idea of who's listening today. So we've got a couple of poll questions just to establish the sort of the background of the people who are signed into this today. And the first question is, what is the current status of your school? Just a couple of options up there: local authority, single academy, multi-academy trust, or other. So if you can just vote, sort of give your options there, just because it helps us to understand who is listening and perhaps tailor some of the things we say to the audience better. So I think that's useful for us. Most people are single academy schools at the moment, and a third of listeners are from multi-academy trusts. And then there's just a second question that we've got, which relates to your plans. So you'll see again the options on the screen: no plans to merge, actively considering merger but no active discussions, in merger discussions, or recently merged. So again, please if you could vote on that, that would be useful for us. So about half and half. That's really handy to be able to have that information. So just to start us then, some of the key advantages of joining or merging. You've got a couple of points up on your screen there, and we'll go into some more detail surrounding some of these during the course of the webinar. But I think the first bullet point that you've got on the screen is very important, and that's the ability to share resources and knowledge amongst the schools within a multi-academy trust or a number of academies, enabling schools to work together better rather than on a very standalone basis. Wherever we've seen that seems to have worked very effectively. And we'll come back to some more considerations around that later. Economies of scale on a number of levels, really. Obviously, if you're already set up with a number of central overhead costs, perhaps relating to finance, things like IT, facilities, premises, those sorts of things. Obviously, the more schools you have within a multi-academy trust, the more widely you can spread those. It might also enable things like better purchasing, and doing obviously things on a different scale can lead to advantages. Opportunities for staff members I've put up there, and again this sort of relates back to the first point in terms of the ability to share resources and knowledge. Where a member of staff perhaps has been working in a single school, they are more restricted to just working in that school, and perhaps they don't want to go through the traditional promotion routes, but they don't really have any opportunities to progress. We've seen with a number of multi-academy trusts that forming the trust allows staff to work across different schools, perhaps in different roles, and take their careers in slightly different directions than they would have been able to if they stuck to that single school. And that's been good. Not every teacher wants to progress and be a head of department or become a deputy head or ultimately a head teacher, but allowing different roles within a MAT structure has been advantageous. Again, similar to the sharing point, peer review, being able to work together as a group of schools and to peer review yourself against another similar type of school within the trust is a very useful opportunity. Not only can you compare how you do things, but also you can challenge each other, which obviously then aids improvement. And there are a number of cash flow advantages sometimes in joining or merging. So to look at some more detail around some of these points and to consider some of the key issues when looking to merge or join an existing trust, I'll hand over to my colleague Darren, who's going to take you through a number of those.
Thank you, Alex. As Alex explained, when deciding whether to join an existing MAT or to merge two MATs together, it's clearly a big decision for any school or academy. There are a number of factors you need to consider. So let's start with some of the fundamentals. The motive, why do it? It's crucial to know from the outset why you are doing it, why you are merging or joining a multi-academy trust. What are you trying to achieve? Two parties will clearly have very different views and very different aspirations. It's important to note that from the start. Resource. This will take time. By that we mean, I think all schools need to recognise that to successfully merge two multi-academy trusts or for a single school to enter or join a multi-academy trust, it will take a significant amount of time and effort. So do you have the resources to do this? Do you have staff who have capacity to take on this role? Perhaps you need to bring someone in from outside, and these are the considerations that you do need to think about. Structure of negotiation. Here we've got easy wins or big differences. By this we mean, as I've already said, two different parties will have different motives and different views. So you need to address these early on to decide whether the gap can be bridged or not. Don't leave these conversations to the end. Deal with the bigger issues from the start to see whether it is something that can be carried further forward. By perception, takeover or loss of control, by that we mean that there's a PR piece to be had here. You do need to win the hearts and minds of all people involved. Clearly you need to highlight the advantages. If not, it can be seen as a takeover, one stronger party taking over perhaps a school that is struggling, which then can have knock-on effects that can last years and years. By readiness for expansion, we mean, are the processes in place within the existing MAT to take on further schools so that they can effectively bolt on and fit into the MAT as it stands. Some of the other considerations that we feel are worth noting are cultural fit and vision and ethos. Do the parties have a common vision? Do they have a similar view of, or ambition for the future? That can be on an educational basis. Do they have the same educational fit? Do they want to or do they aim to deliver similar learning experiences for their pupils? The mix of schools is important too. We see feeder primary schools usually joining up with secondary schools, but it's important to note or at least consider who does the secondary school then rely on and lean on and share resources with. And as the multi-academy structure continues to grow, we will see more secondaries forming with their feeder schools, but perhaps more than one secondary school. Differing priorities, again, we're talking here a similar point about strategic aim, the direction of schools and common vision and so on, which is clearly very important. Some other considerations, governance structure, and this is an important one and will vary from multi-academy trust to trust. What will the governance structure look like? Will authority be delegated to local governing bodies? And that may be different between the two multi-academy trusts that are merging, and so that will need to be ironed out early on. The advice is to keep the main board as lean as it can be. There is a tendency for all schools, and from all, if there are two multi-academy trusts that are merging, all parties like to be represented. And of course that's human nature. However, that does need to be considered from the outset to ensure that the governance structure is workable and decisions can be made. Likewise, leadership on a more operational basis. Who is going to be the CEO, for want of a better word, or the CFO from a financial point of view? And again, egos and human nature could feature here. So dealing with these points early on in the process are very important. Teaching and learning I've already touched on, and ensuring that the vision of your education experience is the same between the two entities merging. Systems, clearly, if two multi-academy trusts are going to merge, they may currently have different systems, maybe perhaps with payroll or accounting or budgeting. To truly gain from the synergies and the efficiencies, we would recommend that all the schools and all the entities within the trust are on the same systems and controls. That is where the economies of scale can work, both from an accounting point of view, but also a reporting. It's a uniform reporting style. Moving on now to the overview of accounting issues, and as Alex mentioned, we'll just give a high level here. It's important to note that if you have two multi-academy trusts that are merging, you would essentially one trust would fold into the other. One would remain, one would cease. There are certain disclosures in both sets of accounts. The trust that is going to cease will need final accounts, and there will be assets and liabilities listed in those. Those will then effectively transfer into the ongoing multi-academy trust. It's important to note that the ESFA do look at these accounts, and they do check that what is shown and represented in one set of accounts is reflected in the ongoing trust going forward. Bank account practicalities, by that we mean the actual bank, the money in the bank will need to be transferred into the ongoing trust, and that will need to be done before closure. And then in terms of trust closure, there are certain processes from a legal standpoint that you would need to go through in terms of closing the legacy trust, and that will include company law and charity law perspectives. Moving on to due diligence. So by this we mean a series of checks to check whether there is suitability, whether there is joint themes that you can work on, and you should take this further. Taking income and expenditure first, looking perhaps at a breakdown of income streams, looking at actual and predicted pupil numbers going forward and local demographics to ensure that it is a sustainable model, and looking at your expenditure against budgets or any unusual expenditure that's occurred recently or in the future. From a balance sheet point of view, you would carry out checks on to ensure that all assets and liabilities exist. You would look at breakdowns, and you would look at control accounts to ensure that everything is in order. From a cash flow point of view, you would probably look at any cash that's coming in or going out, both historically and in the future, to ensure that your models are sustainable and it is worthwhile to push forward with the merge. On the budgets and forecast side, you would look forward at their 3 to 5 year budgets as well as their 12-month budget. And how would that affect cash flow? Once again, is it a sustainable model? Are there economies of scale that can be achieved by moving forward with a potential merge. Similar point, reserves. What reserves will come across from the closing trust into the existing and continuing trust? Are those reserves at a level that are sufficient and sustainable going forward? And then similarly, on the capital spend point of view, are some of those reserves already earmarked or designated for future capital spend? Perhaps one of the two trusts are committed to already. These are all items that do need to be considered from a financial point of view. It's worth noting that that's not an exhaustive list, but hopefully gives you an idea of the sort of areas that do need to be considered. So far we've covered off the financial due diligence, but there's also other areas that do need to be covered. From an education or educational point of view, you would look at the Ofsted reports of any potential trust that may come on board. You would look at the policies and procedures, look at their record in the past to ensure that it does meet and fit with your culture. Likewise, from a property point of view, you perhaps would look at property surveys and insurance arrangements to check that all is in order and there's no gremlins, for want of a better word, in there that you would inherit as part of the merger. From a legal point of view, you perhaps would look at health and safety and any action plans and policies that are in place, as well as any severance pay or compromise agreements that have been made in recent times, or perhaps in the coming period at the point that you are merging. From a HR point of view, similarly, you may look at any complaints or grievances or disciplinaries ongoing, which clearly could have an impact on whether you decide to go ahead with the potential merge. And then also pay structure and organisational charts and so on. And coming back to an earlier point, how would the leadership structure work within the new model going forward? Finally, from a governance point of view, we've already touched on, is there a governance cultural fit going forward? But also, what's the governor training like within the trust that you are negotiating or talking to? There could be a high turnover of governors. That could perhaps give you an early warning sign. Perhaps look at their skills audits to see if there are any gaps and what is the trust doing to address those. And this will give you a flavour once again as to whether you feel it is appropriate to move forward with the potential merger. Again, that was not an exhaustive list, but hopefully gives you a high-level idea of the inquiries you would make and the checks that you would undertake to ensure that it's a suitable fit and therefore the merger is the right course of action going forward. So I'll hand back to Alex now to conclude.
Okay, thank you very much, Darren. Just before I go on to sort of a few conclusions and sum up a little bit, just a reminder, if you've got questions, then please do ask them and we'll answer as many of those as we can do. I think in terms of going forward, it's likely that there will be more and more mergers of academies and existing multi-academy trusts. It's something that's been encouraged over a number of years now, and the financial pressures that schools are starting to realise that they're going to have over the next 3, 4, 5 years, even if they're not having those pressures now, will certainly lead to a number of single school academies looking at whether it's sustainable for them to move forward as a single school and look to whether they can work more effectively by joining with other schools and sharing some of those central overhead costs. However, as we've sort of hopefully illustrated today, there are many reasons for merging, and it's very, very important that schools do it for the right reasons. A merger is a complex process which will take a lot of time, and it's therefore not something to take lightly. So getting that motive right at the start and really understanding what it is that you're trying to achieve and what the vision of what the bigger multi-academy trust looks like going forward is something that needs to be really thought about actively at a very early stage before anything else is done, really. Schools need to think about who's going to do this work. As Darren mentioned, have the people who should be doing the work got the time and resources to do that work? And who is it? Is it going to be business managers and head teachers, or are other people going to get involved as well in that? The important thing, as I said though, is to make sure people have the time. Most people who I meet in schools don't currently have lots of free time and are rather busy doing the job that they're already doing. So finding people with the time to do that can be difficult. Thinking about the key issues, we've mentioned a number today, obviously motive being a key one, but really are some things going to be just insurmountable? The perception one is very important. If you've got a group of schools coming together in a local area, is the perception that one school is taking over another school, and is the perception that perhaps the weaker school or the smaller school won't have as much influence and say going forward, so they'll be told what to do? If that view is shared by a number of the governors in one of the schools, then it might be that actually it's going to be very difficult to move forward, because you're just never going to be able to get over that. If one school, be it the staff or the governors, think that they're being told what to do, then it probably something that you have to hit straight away, or not do it at all. Similarly, looking at the governance structure of the school going forward and how the schools and the MAT is run going forward, it could be that you have a very decentralised model where things happen at a local level still, or you have at the opposite end of the spectrum, a very centralised model where all the central services happen perhaps in one place. If the two parties are at opposite ends of the spectrum, i.e. they very much prefer a decentralised model in their current MAT, or one school has a very centralised model, it might be that the two aren't going to be able to be joined together very, very easily, certainly. Same with governance and the people who are the governors and the directors of the multi-academy trust. If you currently have a small board which makes strategic decisions, but another MAT who you're considering merging with has a much larger board and perhaps don't operate in the same way, then that is going to be a difficult situation to be able to reconcile. And of course, consider whether the schools are ready to merge, or the MATs are ready to expand. Thinking about lessons from the private sector, nothing really new here, but there have been many failures of commercial companies who have tried to merge, where actually at the end of the day the motives were wrong, or the two businesses were not suited to working with each other. And the other point that we see on the commercial side very often is that people become so involved in the merger talks that actually they take their eye off the day-to-day running of their business in the commercial sector. So again, that time thing is absolutely critical. As Darren mentioned, due diligence is also essential, and the one people obviously think about immediately is financial, and what the financial picture might look like going forward. But obviously there's a lot more to it than that, and you'll certainly need to take advice from lawyers looking at some aspects, and possibly engage your auditors or other accountants in the financial process, depending on what the merger looks like. So that was everything we wanted to say. We have got a number of questions coming in, and I Darren, can I hand over
Yes.
you to look at the first of the questions?
Yes, okay. Just to note, we've had quite a few, so we might not be able to get through them all in the time scale, and we can take some offline and reply to separately. The first one, essentially the question broken down is: a new MAT is going to be formed, and how long will it take? It will include some secondary academies and perhaps some primary schools as well. To answer that, the answer, as with many things, is it depends. Depends on how difficult or how complex the land arrangements are, because usually that ends up being the stumbling block. Also depends the backlog at the ESFA, which can change depending on what time of the year it is. But having said that, from our experience, if the consultation process with parents is effective and communicated well, and that process is kicked off as soon as possible, then there's no reason why the process can't be completed within a 6 to 12 month period. Perhaps slightly vague, but as I say, it depends on certain circumstances. Second question that's come in that I'll just mention briefly: when two schools merge into a MAT, do they still have to submit separate accounts to Companies House? But what we have here is essentially when a merger takes place, one trust folds into the other one. The legacy trust, or the trust that no longer has a school within it, essentially dies off over a period of time. So going forward, you would have one set of one set of statutory accounts that would need to be filed at Companies House. There may be some tidying up to do in the first year, but generally speaking, it's one set of accounts going forward that consists of all schools within the multi-academy trust.
And similarly, there's been a question about the process at the date of the MAT formation. Would you expect to complete an external audit of accounts at the date of MAT formation? I think the answer to that, Darren, chip in if you want to, but not necessarily. You could do. Obviously, when the auditors look at the year-end set of accounts for that year, they will need to consider the balances that are brought into the trust that is the ongoing trust. So at that point, they might need to do some audit work. As Darren has just mentioned, the MAT that is merging into another trust, or the school that's merging into another trust, will still have their accounts audited for that year, so the income and expenditure items will get audited anyway. The key thing to look at really is the cut-off position and the date that on the date of the merger. So not formally necessarily, but certain balances will need to be looked at that date.
Okay. Other questions that have come in, there's a short question here: can church schools join non-church school MATs? The short answer is yes, but Alex does have a little bit more experience in that area than me.
Yeah, so the answer is yes. Depending on the type of church school, it can be done in different ways. I think when multi-academy trusts first started, it wasn't done, generally speaking, and could be quite difficult. However, both controlled Church of England schools and aided Church of England schools now can join a MAT where there are non-church schools. It's just essential to obviously get all parties involved, because the structure of the governance and the structure and the setup of the MAT going forward will need to be based on the requirements of the various parties.
Okay, and the last question we have, sorry, we have run out of time, but who should get involved in negotiations? Presumably that's negotiations upon a potential merger. Well, again, it depends, but you would usually see the head teachers involved at both schools, the accounting officers, the school business managers, perhaps the school improvement officer, and then sometimes a steering group that's formed out of governors from both sides. There's no one-size-fits-all answer to this, but having a wide range of people with different viewpoints is clearly important to cover off both financial and educational aspects.
Okay, thank you very much, Darren. that's all we've got time for today. There are some other questions I know we haven't answered. I think we will be able to come back to you individually on those points and answer those questions directly. So we will pick up on those and be in touch very shortly. I'd like to thank everybody for attending today's webinar, and just to say that the webinar will be available on our website fairly shortly. So if you have a colleague who wants to listen to it and was unable to attend today, then please do have a look at our website and you'll be able to find it there. You've got our contact details on the screen. Obviously, if you've got another James Cooper Creston contact, then please feel free to contact them about any of the issues. But if you do think of anything else or would like to discuss any of the matters further that we've been through today, then do get in touch. Finally, a couple of other useful links on the screen, and do get in touch with us if you want to. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.